All right, so in this lesson, I am going to be going over the law of sines and something called the law of cosines. Both of these, you will definitely need your calculator for pretty much every single question. You're going to want to follow along with me in the notes as well, because a lot of this won't make sense unless you have the notes in front of you. Okay, so going over the notes, first off, if I were to ask you to solve a right triangle, and let's say this is 23 degrees, this is 4, and you had to solve for x, this would be easy because you could just use sine of 23 equals opposite over hypotenuse, cross multiply and solve. Well, sometimes we're not going to have right triangles to work with. So in situations when we're not going to have right triangles to work with, there's a couple different ways to solve a triangle. The first way is I'm going to teach you something called the law of sines. And all the law of sines says is, well, first off, let me set a triangle up just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Sorry, not a right triangle, just any kind of a triangle. Let's say this is angle A, angle B, and angle C. Angles are capitalized, and the sides across from them are lowercase. A, B, and C. Okay, the law of sines says if we take the sine of any angle and put it over its side, it would have to be the exact same ratio as the sine of another angle over its side, which is the sine of the last angle over its side. This is called the law of sines. Now, you use the law of sines when you have 3 out of 4 pieces. You have a side, an angle across from that, and then another angle or another side. Let me show you what I mean, for example. Let's take this first example that I say in my notes. This is 30 degrees. Let's say this is 80 degrees. And this is side X, and they give you side 14. We have to solve for X. This isn't a right triangle, so I can't use right triangle trig. I can't use SOHCAHTOA. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say sine of an angle over its opposite side, sine of A over side A equals sine of another angle over its opposite side. So now I have a proportion all set up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to say 14 times sine of 80 equals x times sine of 30. Okay, now that I have this, I can divide both sides by sine 30, and this is actually what I plug into my calculator. So with my calculator, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the top first. You could do it, you have to make sure that your calculator is calculated the correct way. So I'm going to say 14 times sine of 80. I'm going to press equals, and then press equals first, and then divide that by sine of 30. And this side, which seems about right, this should be 27, more or less about 27.6, which is, that's right, because if this is 30 degrees, this is going to be a smaller side than if this is 80 degrees. Okay, that's called law of sines. Now, this is when you're trying to find a missing side. Whenever you're trying to find a missing angle, like the next example that I give you, I say this is X, this is 71 degrees, this is 11, and this is 8. You have to find this angle. Now, look in the notes, I say whenever you're doing the angles, you always do the inverse. But before I do it, I'm going to set it up using law of sines, because as long as I have an angle and a side across from it, and I'm trying to find another angle, and I'm given the side across from it, I can always use law of sines. So I'm going to say sine of 71 over its opposite angle, or over its opposite side equals sine of this angle over this opposite side. All right, cross multiply now. I'm going to have 11 times sine x equals 8 times sine 71. Now I have to isolate my angle x, so I got to divide both sides by 11 to get that out. And then I'm going to have sine of x equals whatever this answer is. So what I'm going to do on my calculator is I'm going to figure out this answer. So I'm going to go 8 times sine 71. I'm going to press equals. I'm going to divide that by 11. And I get sine x equals, you don't need to write this out, but 0.6876, so on and so on. But I want the angle. Remember in trig, whenever you're trying to find an angle, it's the inverse. So I'm going to do inverse of that answer. And I'm going to get an angle of 43. X is approximately equal to 43.4 degrees. Okay, now, that is with the law of sines. The law of cosines, which is the next slide, is a little more in depth. Okay, now with law of cosines, I'm going to ask you to do one weird thing. Whatever side or whatever angle you're trying to find, for the sake of the formula, we are going to make that our C. Now, whenever you're trying to find a missing side, you're going to take c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus parentheses 2ab cosine of angle C. This is to find a side. So let's start off with a couple questions when I'm trying to find a side. Let's look at number 1 in the example. Number 1 in the example is this is 21, 71, 28, and x. Okay, normally I would say use law of sines. But you can't use law of sines because you could say sine 71 over x equals, you can't say sine of this angle over 21 because you have two variables. You can't say sine 71 over x equals sine of y over 20. There's two variables. So luckily, notice how this angle from basic geometry, or probably in math 1, is side angle side of a triangle. Whenever you have a triangle with two sides and an included angle, you can use the law of cosines. Now, remember what I said also a couple seconds ago. Whatever side or angle you're trying to find, make that your angle or side C. So this is my x. I'm going to make this my side C. So therefore, this is my angle C. That's why, because remember, angles are across from the sides, and this is A and this is B. Or this is A and this is B. A and B doesn't matter. Just make sure that your angle that you're trying to find, or your angle that you have, or that your side that you're trying to find, is your C. Now I'm going to set it up. I'm going to say C squared equals A squared plus B squared minus parenthesis 2 times my A times my C times cosine of angle C. Cosine of angle C is 71. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this all into my calculator. Plug this whole thing into your calculator and watch what happens. Just make sure you plug it in correctly. I'm going to say 21 squared plus 28 squared minus parenthesis 2 times 21 times 28 times cosine of 71. Close that. And I'm going to get 842.1 something. So look, I have C squared equals 842.13 blah, 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 blah. But there's no way that this side is equal to 842 because notice in the formula, it's c squared. Oh, you're seeing here. It's c squared. So the way you get rid of a square is you square root it. So I'm going to say the square root of 842. So this side is approximately 29 degrees. Approximately. Yeah, that's about right. Because look, this is 21, this is 28. Yeah, it's about 29, more or less. Or not degrees, sorry, just regular. Okay, let's try the second one. Here is the second one. Why don't you guys pause the video and try this? You know what? You can also use, and don't use this, but you can use... Okay, now what I'm going to do, you can set this up like, you could say this is opposite and adjacent. So technically you could say tangent 41 equals opposite over adjacent. Cross multiply, so 30 times tangent 41 is your answer. But I'm going to show you, if this wasn't a right triangle, you couldn't do that. So I'm going to show you to get the exact same answer. But let's just figure out what this answer is right now. Let's say 30 times tangent 41 is equal to approximately 26. I'm going to find this using the law of cosines also. All right, so... Oh, actually, I don't need to use law of cosines. I can use law of sines. But you know what? Let's just skip this because there's no reason to do a question when you already know how to do it. I don't want to confuse you. Let's do the last one. All right, here's the last one. 53, 62, 110. Let's try to find this side. Okay, remember whenever they have SAS, side, angle, side, you could always use law of cosines. And since I'm trying to find this side, I'm going to make this my angle, my side C. This is going to be my angle C, and the A and B, it doesn't matter which one's what. All right, now I'm going to plug this in. C squared equals A squared plus B squared minus parenthesis 2 times 53 times 62 times cosine of 110. Now, with this, after I plug the whole thing in, I'm going to square root my answer. So I'm just going to plug everything in my calculator right now. 53 squared plus 62 squared minus 2 times 53 times 62 times cosine of, cosine of 110. I'm going to press equals. You can hear my kids screaming in the background because he just got in trouble. It's just wonderful at 10 o'clock at night. Now I'm going to square root my answer. And my answer is 94, which is about right because this is your biggest angle. This is going to be your biggest side. Okay. Now the very last part of this is, if you go down in the notes, it's finding an angle. Whenever you're trying to find an angle, I'm going to give you a formula because I don't like the way I do it in the notes. I'm just going to use these as an example. Whenever they give you a triangle with all three sides, you can always find the missing angle. And this is the formula that I'm going to have you do. It's cosine of C equals A squared plus B squared minus C squared over 2AB. This is the formula for the law of cosines. Okay, I was just going over to making sure that everything is good to go and listening to my kid to see if I hear him crying in the background still. All right, so whatever your angle you're trying to find, you're going to make that your angle C. In the example in the notes, this is my angle C, so this is going to be my side C, this is A, and this is B. So I'm going to plug everything in. Cosine of this angle equals 19 squared plus 25 squared minus 23 squared over 2 times 19 times 25. All right, now what I'm going to do is this. 19 squared plus 25 squared minus 23 squared. But I'm going to press equal because my calculator will get all messed up. I'm going to say divided by, but I'm going to put this whole thing in parentheses. 2 times 19 times 25, close the parenthesis, and, wait. Oh, sorry. Hold on a second. Parenthesis, 2 times 19 times 25, close the parenthesis, and I'm going to get a decimal answer. But look, I have cosine of angle C. Remember, you do the inverse of this whenever you're using trig. Inverse cosine to find this angle. So I'm going to go inverse cosine of whatever the answer was, and it's going to spit me out approximately 61 degrees. About 61 degrees. Okay, now the very last question is going to ask you to solve for every angle. So I'm going to draw this. This is 62. This is 51. And this is 48. Let's just find this angle first. So I'm going to make this angle my angle C. I'm going to make this my side C, and this is A and this is B. Or A and B. It doesn't matter which one's A and B. Let's say cosine of angle C equals A squared plus B squared minus C squared over 2 times your A times your B. And then I'm going to do inverse cosine that answer. So let's plug this in my calculator. 51 squared plus 62 squared minus 48 squared, press equals, divided by parenthesis 2 times 51 times 62, close the parenthesis, and then I'm going to get a decimal, but I'm going to inverse cosine that answer, and I'm going to have approximately 49 degrees. This is 49 degrees. So I'm going to redraw this triangle now. 62, 49, 51, 48. Now, the easiest way to find one of these angles, because I have to find everything, is to use law of sines now. So let's make this your angle C. This is your side C. This is A and B. Oh, I'm sorry. This is for cosines. We don't need to do that. We're just going to say sine A of 51, or let's just say sine X of 51 over 51 equals sine 49 of 48. Sine 49 over 48. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to cross multiply, and you're going to divide this answer by 48. And then inverse sine to find this specific number. Once you have this number, which I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to do it because there's not really any reason, because you understand what I'm doing. Once you have this number, do 180 minus these two to find that angle. And then you have found all three angles.